You're listening to Merykid Explains, an oral history of one artist's discography featuring facts, feelings, and most importantly, context. Now, maybe you stumbled here by accident, or perhaps you're listening on some faraway planet in some distant time, vibing off an ancient method of communication. Or maybe, just maybe, you're one of the dozens of die-hard Merykid fans that actually finds value in this content. Regardless, feel free to sit back, get comfortable, and listen along to the gentle ramblings of a man and his memories. This is Merykid Explains. Live from Studio A is what I would consider the beginning of the next chapter or phase of my artistry, the Merykid experience, so to speak. If you've been following along, the first three episodes were covering the beginnings and the evolution of sort of where I started, which Corduroy Crown was a very folky, singular experience, and then it transferred into Boy and the Bird, which kind of became a more experimental effort. I brought in other musicians, and then went to Live at the Magic Attic, which was it was captured live, but it was all original songs, and it was a heavily psychedelic experimental project. And so those three things, the kind of folk music, the fleshed out band experience, and then the psychedelic experimental aspect, like that sort of laid the groundwork of the first phase, so to speak, of what I was trying to do. And if you also recall from the last episode, I had just sort of established this understanding between myself and the San Antonio art community, where they weren't really feeling what I was putting out. It's not to say that the quality wasn't there, but what I was doing was not what was being recognized locally as something worth paying attention to. And in fact, with Magic Attic, the press that I received locally was sort of notably dismissive, if not outrightly disrespectful to what I was trying to do. And I took it in stride, because when you love something, you know, you put up with a lot. The fine line between being committed and being abused is often blurred in these kinds of situations, and I was not ready to give up my pursuit of being the sort of champion of San Antonio's music scene. It was a title that I was gunning for, if that made sense. That was sort of a weird motivator of my actions, was what can I do to not only establish myself as a champion of San Antonio, but also establish San Antonio as a champion of like a music scene. These were the types of things that I was factoring into my choices and how I performed, what I recorded, who I was as an artist, etc. And so if you were around me at the time in any capacity, you knew that being from San Antonio was a large part of the identity of what Merykid was. And this next phase is when I doubled down on that. In fact, my response to that write-up from the local paper regarding the CD release of the Magic Attic, which, again, quoted as them saying, Merykid is described as a combination of Radiohead and Jason Mraz. Why would anyone want that? That still makes me laugh when I think about it. My reaction to that was to then double my efforts into saying, like, okay, I will prove that I'm worthy of being supported. And so here comes the Live at Studio A, which this is the second of the live cuts of an original album. So all of the music here is original. These are the first takes of all of these songs, and the only times that most of them have ever been released, except for on this one, I actually did a live take of For the Writers in California. The only time I've ever played the song live. And I swapped out the trumpet for a kazoo in order to get that same kind of like saxophony, woodwind. It just gave me some kind of different color to add. But yeah, I didn't even remember. I hadn't listened to this record actually in about 10 years until I recently found it and uploaded it to all of the streaming services. And when I saw that, not only did I see that and think, oh man, I actually attempted For the Writers. I got a text from my friend Brandon McCormick, who I'm going to talk about him in a minute, but he was present for the recording of it. And he himself texted me when it was up, and he was like, I can't believe you actually did a version of Writers in California. So I wasn't the only one that was kind of if you're one of the dozens of Merykid fans, you would know why that's just such a weird and also really interesting choice. But without further ado, to get into the scene, let me set the scene of this era. It's 2010. I'm on the mend regarding my physical battle with illness, the medicine. There's a bunch of experimental medications that I've been on. One of them is actually working. And so where I'm at right now is I've been ordered by my doctors to simply exist, let your body recover from the years of what you've been fighting. And so I existed in this really interesting space where I had free time and energy to put into my work, my art. And what I believe, and you know, we'll go into this on the other end of this episode, but whether or not all of that free time and energy ended up being for good or for bad is subjective. You know, you can be the judge if you care so much to find out, but it explains a lot of where I was at this time. So let me get into one of the most important factors of this. So at this point, Brandon McCormick, a lifelong friend of mine, I say lifelong, at this point we met in 2005, so it's been almost 20 years. Brandon was interning at Atlantic Records in 2007, and when I was in the band Window, we were on tour, and he actually set up a showcase for us with some reps from Atlantic Records. So he's a guy that was like championing a project I was in from the very beginning. And when I went solo, Brandon immediately sort of just stuck around with it and was involved and interested and kind of wanted to be a part of everything. And it was right around this time that he also kind of doubled down and was like, let's make this work. So him and I put a concentrated sort of team effort into seeing what could pop off with Merykid. One of the early ways that he helped me out was that he was actually going to Trinity University at the time, and Trinity has a radio station, KRTU 91.7 FM, which is a very established jazz station. That's where they get the bulk of their funding. Are this sort of like worldwide? They have a worldwide presence in the jazz community for this radio station. And then at night, around 10 p.m. Central Time, if I'm not mistaken, until maybe like 5 or 6 a.m., they turn into what's called Indie Overnight, and they play all just like the programming becomes a real sort of eclectic scope of indie music. So different rocks and hip hops and weird, like that's when it gets weird. You know, like you could tune in at 3 or 4 in the morning and there's some just like college kid who hasn't slept yet alone in the booth. Like you can really hear him just sort of like mumbling into the microphone describing why he's choosing this cut from Arcade Fire or whatever. Your run-of-the-mill college radio station, but just powered by the daytime presence of being a jazz station that was beloved throughout the world. So this community had like a well-established fan base, like this radio station. And Brandon, being a student at Trinity in the comm department, he had friends who had a show, and for Boy and the Bird, he got me a spot to come and just talk about the album. And it was hosted at the time by a guy named JD. And then his partner, I don't remember her name, but she went by something 3000. Like, you know, she was kind of biting on Andre. Jasmine 3000. That's what she would call herself. And I called her, I remember telling her that she should go by J3K. But that's here nor there. I did a session with them where I just kind of like plugged the album and we played a couple songs. We talked about it, and then a year or so went by, and I got an email sometime in 2010 early, and it was from JD. And JD, apparently in this time, JD had become the station manager of KRTU, and his first call to action was he was going to try to bridge the gap between this radio station and the local music scene. And I just happened to be the only local musician he knew of, and he asked me in this email, would you like your own radio show where you are playing only local music? And right there began the new chapter in my life as not only a musician and not only sort of like someone trying to champion the local scene, but also as a professional creative in general, to have that now in my resume where I was being given my own FM radio channel. And I had never been on the radio, and I did not attend Trinity University, but I dove in head first. And this began a very... The way I would describe it, it was fruitful. It was certainly fruitful, and in fact, it was very advantageous for me, and it helped me grow a lot, and it helped me establish a lot of relationships. And I learned a lot about how business works in regard to what you can offer someone and what then you can sort of come to the table with in regard to either asking for favors or needing help in some area. And I'll discuss the radio station in another setting and the radio show in general. But what that gave me, again, remember, my entire motive at the time was just like showing that I was this San Antonio champion, like someone trying to just put San Antonio on their shoulders. And suddenly I was being given the first ever show in San Antonio's radio history that only played San Antonio music, and that was huge for me. And the show that I ended up naming Live and Local, in 2010 we created it, and today in 2022 the show still exists and it still goes by the same name, which of the few things that I've ever done that have sort of spanned the test of time, that is one of them. I'm very proud of it. Nobody even know it was so long ago that, and JD has moved on, and everyone that was involved has moved on to the point where I don't think anybody even knows that I it's not like they have a plaque with my face on it. There's no remembrance or semblance of me having any sort of footing in that part of the San Antonio's art history. But yeah, me and JD and Brandon became a part of it too. He had his own show for a while, and I know that he sort of came on to help JD because they were friends. He was involved in the radio stuff too, and so we sort of, this like small group of guys, just kind of like took on this new direction of this radio station. Two guys that were Trinity alums, and then me just being the representative musician of the scene. So the other new thing that we brought on to the station, aside from my show Live and Local, was we brought on Live at Studio A, and this is where we were bringing in musicians to do a couple of live performances, sort of like not a tiny desk, but more so like there was a day trotter thing. Like any radio station, they had a full studio, they had full recording equipment, and they just wanted to utilize it. And so we that was part of my job, was finding musicians to bring them in and do a couple of live shows. Well, it just so happened that one day, I think a band fell through and they had the time reserved, and they asked me, JD kind of threw it out to me and was like, hey, if you want to do it, do it. And that's where this album came from, was me filling the space of a band that had to pull out last minute, and I just wanted to take advantage of it. So this was cut at KRTU. It's called Live at Studio A. That's what the whole series was called. And this never aired. I don't know why. They did not choose any of these recordings to ever sort of like be a part of the representative of that time and that movement. But again, take it for what it was. But I loved the whole presentation of it, and that's why I ended up releasing it as its own project. You can hear JD talking, you can hear Brandon talking, or we're talking about Brandon. And at the very end of the record, you hear JD stopping. He's like, I think we're picking up another radio station. And there was another photographer. I brought a girl in, photographer. Her name was Caitlin. She was in the studio. She kind of laughs and she says, "Awesome." And you can hear me saying, like, is it something that Brandon's doing? Which I don't even know why it would be. It's not like Brandon has the ability to bend electro waves and manipulate them like that. But I don't know. That's what I asked, and I love hearing that. It's such a snapshot of just the people I was surrounded by and the work we were doing. And so that's the context. 2010, I'm maybe 23 still, just about to be 24. This is the spring. I started the radio show in January of 2010. This is sometime around March. And in the original artwork that Brandon shot on his BlackBerry in 2010, so if you can imagine how bad the quality of it was, I'm actually wearing like a Manu Ginobili jersey and playing the piano, but I ended up taking one of Caitlin's photos that she took of this performance. And if you're looking at the artwork, it's me holding a bouzouki, and I've got the kazoo in the harmonica holder, and I'm wearing big glasses, and I'm not wearing any sleeves, and I have a weird hat. And that's just who I was at the time. I was just getting weirder and weirder. I was sort of like within the restraints of folk music. I was growing out of the box that that it was expected to be like a singer-songwriter. And so you were just getting like me wearing weird clothes and playing weird instruments and wearing a weird hat and doing weird stuff. If you're looking at the track list, you see that in between each song is an interlude just called words. Words 1, words 2, words 3, words 4, and words 5. They bookend the album and go in between each song. And obviously the joke was that those are instrumental parts that have no words to them. So, that was just the kind of choice I made at 23. The interesting thing about those interludes is that a friend of mine whose name was Scott, he had a Boss looping station, and he had let me borrow it. And I was just sort of noodling around with it, and I brought it to the studio that day and just had it plugged into my set of effects pedals. And what I was doing was he had pre-recorded a bunch of music into the pedal, and he had like saved them in it, and he, I guess, could come back to them later. And I basically took everything that he had done and then I reversed it. So everything you're hearing is music written by Scott that I had reversed, and that was what ended up being on this album in those 5 different, 4 different words takes, and then the last one is JD talking about me and Brandon and the radio station signals we're picking up. So technically, Scott is a co-contributor to this record. I never gave him the credit on that. I don't know if this album ever got officially released. It was always available to download, but I never did like a big release for it. So hopefully, Scott, if you're listening to this, I made $0 off this, and you can sue me all you want, but you ain't getting nothing because I made nothing. But to get into these songs, New Tricks, February Blues, and See Me Through. New Tricks was one of the stronger songs of the time for me. It was something that it was easy to play, another alternate tuning track, and it was kind of playing back into that clean freak style finger picking, where I sort of, fingers kind of gliding all over the strings, sounding like maybe more than one guitar player at once, filling in a lot of space with the strumming. Lyrically, what I recall from this song, what I really tend to appreciate are the sort of alluding to colors. Red like the color of your sweater, green, referring to me being jealous, and blue like the mood hanging over my head. All of these things, as a songwriter, I look back and I'm like, hey, I had a cool little idea where I was just sort of like digging into the colors as emotions type thing. And I do recall New Tricks being one that it had its own, that was a sort of later stage acoustic song of mine. And so there were people who, if you only started listening to me or seeing me play live shows at a certain time, that might be one that you recognized or maybe were looking to hear. And then the next track, February Blues, this one, there's an allusion to acting. There's a lot of acting. I think in the chorus, every play has an ending. I've seen this one before. If I'm not mistaken, this song I was writing about a girl who I was seeing at the time. She was just kind of one of the girls that I was seeing, and she was an actor. And so I think there was like where I was, as an artist, I think you tend to just sort of use songs as outlets, especially when you're earlier in your career. Art and emotion are kind of going hand in hand, and I tended in this part of my life, since I was no longer struggling as much with the physical and the physical ailments, I tended to be using my songwriting as a sort of venting process for heartache, which I think is a very natural thing. I'm sure you've never heard of a guy with a guitar lamenting over a broken heart. And these songs were probably the most I've ever sort of dumped my heartbreak into a whole project. New Tricks was about an ex-girlfriend who I was having a hard time letting go of. February Blues was about a girl who was an actor who was sort of hovering around at that time, who her and I were very tumultuous. She was an actor, so of course it came with a lot of drama. And her and I were kind of, I think there was a point where her and I actually just kind of acknowledged, like, we didn't really like each other, but we didn't want to be alone. So, and it only got more and more dramatic from that point on. And then See Me Through, which again I consider one of the best songs I've ever written. This was written about another girl at the time who, without naming names, I consider her one of the great loves of my life, which at 23 and 24, those are the ones that get the albums written about them and all those things. So great works of art have been, wars have been fought over the great loves of someone's life, right? And so this girl was someone that I really cared about, that, again, we couldn't quite figure it out. It was a more unrequited love. The timing of it was off. But it made it all the more sweeter, right, to imagine it and lament over it, which led to a song like See Me Through, where it was just kind of circling around a night where her and I like took a walk down it was like a really cold night, and her and I were just walking and kind of talking, and there was that understood thing where it was like we had these feelings, but she was in like a long distance relationship, and it was a terrible long distance relationship, and yet that was like the thing that stood in between us, and it was like it was never going to work because she was just gonna stay with that guy for way too long. even though he was out there cheating on her, and just it was so stereotypical. It was any rom-com movie based around like two young creative people who couldn't just do what they wanted to do, right? Because we have to make our lives harder on ourselves in order to feel something, I guess. I don't know. But See Me Through, it wasn't asking for much. It wasn't asking for a lot. It was just kind of like, hey, maybe give me a little bit of time. I remember thinking about how that's such a sort of like innocent thing to ask. And I think it was because it was such an innocent want. Like, I just wanted to spend more time with this person and figure out why there was something there, figure out why we couldn't figure it out. But with that said, again, the guitar playing is very Blood on the Tracks, Dylan. It's a very Simple Twist of Fate, I think, was a huge influence for this track, which, in my opinion, is one of the most romantic and sad songs. I think of the way that Dylan describes just the simple thing, the simple act of like opening a window and just sort of like looking out. That's always really resonated with me, and so it's a trick to be able to convey so much emotionally with the simplest actions, because when you relate to it, you get these flashes of these little moments in your life where you just sort of took a moment to do something as simple as open a window, and yet how much weight felt like it was on that action in that time. So this song, See Me Through, is a descriptor of a lot of different little moments, like moments where we just sort of caught each other's eye, moments where there was a lot that wasn't being said. And I remember the feelings of walking next to her and yet feeling so distant. And, right, young love, beautiful and tragic, and wars have been fought over it, great stories have been written about it. And See Me Through is just one more drop in the ocean of work inspired by unrequited love. And so, and again, there was the cover of For the Writers in California, which is such a thrill to listen to. It really is. It's really interesting to listen to. Even at the time, that song was old news at the time. It had come out a couple years earlier, and it was just it's the deep cut from that own album, right? So it was more of a gift to any real Merykid fans would be able to like listen to me play that song, and they'd be like, oh my God, it's that one. That deep cut. A deep Merykid cut, since clearly there's a huge audience for that type of work. It's there. I served it up. But so with that said, this album, yeah, just a couple of love songs, all very strong in the songwriting vein, and I think a lot. What's interesting about this project is that I was doing a lot of work to distract the listener or the viewer from seeing me or hearing me, in the sense that from a listening standpoint, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of effects, a lot of reverb, there's a lot of distracting sounds that kind of weave in and out. And then visually, if you look at the actual like artwork photo, you're seeing me, and it's like, look at everything in between you, the observer, and then me, the artist. There's a light, and then there's the instrument in my hands. My arm is crossed over the instrument, and then there's the harmonica holder with the kazoo in it, and then there's the glasses, and then there's the hat. And so there's like the elements that stand in between me and the viewer. It's like that's how guarded I was at the time, or maybe even how, I don't even know how to explain it, but when I think of who I was and I look at this photo and I listen to this music, I think that the best word to describe who I was is the word restless, because I was fully stepping away from the image of the sort of singer-songwriter that had kind of introduced me as a solo artist. I was already trying to figure out how to step out of that box, so to speak. And I was struggling with my identity. I was struggling with how my actions up to this point had not caught on with the only place I was trying to actually impress, which was San Antonio. I was actually getting national press at this time and like really good placements that arguably were on par with any other San Antonio artist, if not like actually kind of leading the charge with how I was being recognized around the country or the world through the internet. And yet nobody in San Antonio seemed to care or even notice. And so I was just getting restless, and I was starting to try to make as much noise and maybe even stand out as much as possible. Everything that I see and hear when I look at this version of Merykid is pay attention to me. Pay attention. And maybe it was my ego leading the charge, or maybe it was just me wanting some undue credit for the work I was doing. Either way, I was getting restless, and that's sort of the complete the complete summary of this project and just who I was. And to wrap it up, this was the last time, and true to form here, this was the last time that I would actually record a straight up folk record where it's just me, a guitar, and a microphone. Everything that came after this expanded in a much bigger way. I mean, imagine like the metaphor of like a sun imploding and then just turning into this supernova. Everything that I did after this was hugely thematic, hugely conceptual, mostly electronic at this point. Never not a full band, full on spectrum of instruments and frequencies in all the songs. So this was about as raw and vulnerable as I possibly could get, and it would never be this way again. And that's all. That's kind of what that was my takeaway from this era. Live at Studio A was a nice little sort of goodbye to that chapter, and in fact like was kind of the beginning. You can see the elements of what was beginning and what had created the new direction that I was about to go into, which would be the Raccoon. So stick around for that episode.